Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Cheats Movement Podcast. Yes, I know we're about 10 minutes behind schedule. We are dealing with some technical issues as always, but I am very excited to talk about the midterm elections, to talk with some of the most in the know people to have this discussion with. So, with no further ado, you can see them already on the screen. I've got the chair of the the Richmond City Democratic Committee, Jewel Jordan, is with us. Jewel, welcome to the Cheats Movement.
Hey. Thanks for having me up here. I appreciate it.
All right, and we got my main man, Takeen Cooper. I know. Look, how you want me to introduce you, brother? I know you do a lot.
I'm just a concerned citizen, man.
Later, we'll be joined by Alan Charles Chipman as well. You can send your comments via Facebook, via YouTube, via Twitter. I'm going to try to get to as many comments and questions as possible. But it is going on 7:45 p.m. on Wednesday, November 9th. It is one day after what was supposed to be a very sad day for the National Democratic Party, and Democrats in Virginia were, I know, on pins and needles. Let me start with you, Jewel. How do you feel today as you go into Wednesday? It's not done. We got a lot. There's some major races still to be determined, but how do you feel today?
I feel restful and at peace now because it is over, and we spent and did everything that we could do here in Virginia, specifically here in Richmond. It was an honor and a pleasure, and I just want to thank everybody for coming out and voting for Congressman McEachin. He won overwhelmingly in Richmond City alone. He won by more than 80%. So thank you for that. We took some hits in Virginia when we lost Congressman Luria down in the Hampton Roads area. So that's not, that great. We also have the national races coming up, and I'll let you get into them further. But, we have a runoff, and I understand why, but
we're going to get into that. It has been announced that it seems as if there will be a runoff in Georgia. That very well could determine the balance of power in the Senate. I'm going to move over to Takeen. Takeen, as you woke up today, as you've been following this for months and months on end, basically they started following the midterm elections as soon as President Biden got elected. You get to the day after Election Day. How do you feel? What is your overall feeling about how this process went?
Hey, I feel so much better here today having this conversation with y'all than I did 12 months ago having the conversation after the election 2021. I remember we did a recap. Relieved, also inspired because, as Jewel shared, we have the runoff in Georgia, but also we're going to have a special election in Virginia for the Virginia Senate, which that'll be a critical seat because Congresswoman-elect Kiggins was a member of the Virginia Senate. So, I think that's one of the things in Virginia, right? Like, we're happy, we celebrate. Yet last night, today a little bit. We got to get right back to work because we got a lot of work to do next year, reclaiming the majority in the House and enhancing the majority in the Virginia Senate.
Well, let's talk about Virginia first before we talk about the national landscape. There were three kind of big races. I would call it three. There's probably more if you look at it, if you count the first as well. But everyone looked at the 10th, which was Jennifer Wexton's seat. They looked at everybody, especially in Central Virginia, was looking at the 7th, which was Abigail Spanberger's seat. Obviously, Jewel mentioned McEachin, never really in doubt, especially after when you looked at what redistricting did. However, if you look at what redistricting did in the second, you could say it kind of went the other way for Luria. So the question I'd have, and we'll start with you, Takeen, when Tuesday morning before any while the votes are just started, polls just open, what would you have said prediction wise was the outcome of those Virginia, especially those three races, the 10th, the 7th, in the second? And again, how do you feel today based off of that? And is there any particular ones you want to dig into of why you thought it went the way it did?
I felt pretty comfortable about the 10th. So I'll preface this by saying I tried to get out of the election prediction business after 2016.
No one's good at it. Let me tell you, no one's good at election predictions right now.
So I felt pretty good about the 10th. I thought the 7th, a month and a half ago, I was pretty confident about the 7th after Delegate Guzman introduced, went public about her intentions on the trans bill.
Mm.
I thought that could possibly hurt Congresswoman Spanberger, and I was really uneasy. And I thought we might be in trouble in the second
Mm-hmm.
for a
And then
number of reasons, but primarily redistricting, which I'm sure we might talk about the impact of the commission and the constitutional amendment here in Virginia. But redistricting, the second looks a bit different now. Lost Norfolk specifically.
right, we can kind of talk about it as it's going along, because basically what happened in the second is that second district had I guess some of the biggest pockets of Democratic votes were in the Norfolk area. Redistricting took those seats and moved them to Bobby Scott, which was pretty much a safe Democratic seat anyway. Very similar to what redistricting did in the 7th, where they took Democratic votes that were in the suburbs of Henrico, Western Henrico, moved those into the 4th to McEachin, and made basically a safer Republican seat and a very competitive, I would say a Republican-leaning 7th seat, right?
Yeah, I mean, the redistricting commission, in theory, I think, was great. Nonpartisan commission, remove the politics out of drawing lines. But we know we've been in this game a long time. Like, theory doesn't go very far, and so the redistricting commission hurt us. It hurt us last night, and I think that we had an opportunity. We had the majority. Had the opportunity to draw maps, and some people call it gerrymandering, but I think we shot ourselves in the foot with the commission.
Jewel, let me ask you. Yeah, jump in, Jewel. Jump in, Jewel.
I didn't think it was a good idea, the redistricting commission. Like, Black women told them last year, don't do this. We screamed it, we said it, and here we are. It goes back to listen to Black women, So we see what happened with Luria, and let's be real, Elaine Luria isn't a very left-leaning Democrat. She is very moderate. And so to see like the numbers there, Spanberger, I was very concerned about her as well, though. So to see that she pulled it out was great. But they did take those pockets, like you brought up, where they made Congressman Scott and Congressman McEachin's district super safe. And the individuals, and listen, who do they pull out? Those are the people that helped put in Congresswoman Spanberger and Congresswoman Luria. Black folks. They took us out.
And put us in very safe districts with a lot more folks.
It was kind of, like, don't forget, we got Congressman McEachin's district because the Supreme Court said that they had packed everyone into Congressman Scott's district, remember? And so we got the new district, and that's how we got Congressman McEachin. And then they went back and essentially did the same thing again.
Yep. And it Jewel, let me ask, is there anything that surprised you in the Virginia races last night? Was there anything that you were like, man, I didn't see that coming?
No, honestly, no. I thought that Fairfax County, with their amazing committee that they had, they was going to pull it out. Northern Virginia always pulls it out. They keep us on pins and needles, come in a little bit later, as well as Hampton Roads. But I wasn't surprised by that. Unfortunately, we have Herb, who was Herb
in
Jones,
the first district.
Yep. In the first. Right. We knew it was a fight. He tried. It's hard to go up against Whitman, who has like been there and has that network and those finances. So it wasn't that big of a surprise, but it isn't great that we did lose Congresswoman Luria. And like Takeem brought up, it is Virginia. Wednesday we get a little break, so give your volunteers a chance to rest up. But I had folks texting and calling today, and I'm like, sis, please. And but we're going to have us. And I don't want to jump too far into 2023, but I want people who are watching to understand the General Assembly protects Virginia from what happens up there. And so that's why we need to more that we do have it a Democratic majority to get things done, because it also protects us from our governor, who was a Republican. So keep that in mind.
Now, let me ask this, because I know candidates also, I think you mentioned it really well, especially when you talk about the first incumbency, finances, being on television. Whitman was all over television. And I knew people that are fairly engaged that was just saying, hey, look, I see Rob Whitman's TV commercials everywhere, like all in the Central Virginia area. Is there things that you have seen, especially in this midterm, between any of the big three races or more, whether it's a Herb Jones or McEachin or Bobby Scott's campaigns, was there things that you've seen where the candidates did particularly well, or things that candidates needed to particularly work on? Because we also know that candidates drive these elections, and they kind of steer the ship, and they're the ones that are going to ultimately make the call in regards to what is the best use of their campaign time and resources. Is there any particular candidates or races that you said, hey, they did this really well, or I wish they would have done this? Go ahead. Either one.
Okay.
And it's important. It's an important question, because people need to hear what they need to do better or what they've done well.
So I think something that's an opportunity for us in Virginia, that I'll say a number of Virginians and maybe most Virginians didn't realize that, our General Assembly got us same day registration now. And I think that's an opportunity for us moving forward, that we can build a coalition of people and get them to vote at that moment. So in other states we see like souls to the polls, and every year when you're at a polling place, people show up because they get excited. They start seeing commercials, and they show up and like, oh, I'm not registered here, or I used to live in Hampton Roads and I moved to Richmond. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, it's too late. So I think that's an opportunity for us, as we talk about ground games, especially in these more urban areas. We can say, hey, we're going to get a van, we're going to go to this neighborhood, or we're going to go to this church, and then we're going to take people to vote immediately. And so I think that's something that we can really, really lean into in Virginia, because it's an opportunity, because we've had good Democrats in the General Assembly, and that's something that they were passionate about.
There was a very, very, very hard time, and this was, I think, across the state, of getting volunteers in general to come out. They're tired and they're overwhelmed, and I think they haven't been given like the respect that they deserve. And so this year we wanted volunteers. We held a virtual pep rally for Congressman McEachin for RCDC. RCDC members vote. It's not about getting them out to vote. It's getting them out to volunteer, because we're there at the polls, and we know if you go there and they send you away without providing you the access to a provisional ballot, then that's wrong. And there's no one there to stop you. So that's why we wanted volunteers at our precincts. We wanted volunteers there to make sure there wasn't any type of intimidation, going surrounding, and that curbside was done. And so it was just a very hard push for a lot of committees to get volunteers out this year. And I think campaigns need to look at why. I think they need to look at not coming to us, and I'm not talking about Constitution, but coming to many committees in October or late September, instead of always participating. Like, we have a congressman who's always on our calls and always participating. So it's all easy to go out there and help, but you have other folk that just show up and they're like, whatever. Then when we call for volunteers, you have like Congressman Scott area that's safe. So you know what? He isn't. So get, like you said, a bus, but we don't just a bus after. We're talking about busing them out to Spanberg, busing them out to Lurius area, busing them out to these other places. Use the entire Commonwealth because we need you all to represent all of us when you're there. Mm-hmm. So I think there has to be a re-messaging of the importance of volunteers.
And I think Virginia is in particular tough on people like yourself, Jewel, that as a committee chair, people like Takeen who's very active, because like you said, you get what, a 48-hour break, a 24-hour break, and then you're back at it. And then as soon as that's over, you're back at it. And let's call a spade a spade. Last year, the Republican sweep was really deflating for a lot of folks that were looking at Virginia, I think, in a way that may have been inaccurate, right? Like they were looking at Virginia in a way that was either not purple but leaning blue, and they didn't put in perspective that if Republicans nominate candidates that walk the walk, talk the talk, and look the look, then Virginia is actually still a very purple environment. And it's just, Virginia had some, let's just call it like it is. Virginia had some breaks because if they kind of rejected the Trump-like candidate, but we had a statewide run against Ken Cuccinelli and a statewide run against Ed Gillespie with candidates that were very competitive in those. Glenn Youngkin was a different type of candidate, and I do think that the landscape at the time may have, I think it was a much more jarring. We talked about Takeen, we talked about you coming on after that election, and I think a lot of people were actually really surprised, right? And they might have actually, morale might have been a little bit lower, and it's harder to get people to actually, not like I said, not people to vote, but to people to volunteer. Jewel, let me ask this as we're looking at the national landscape, and I know, look, I follow you on Twitter. We talk back and forth, and it seems to be today that it's starting to come out in some of the exit polling and in some of the national kind of commentary that the narrative on Black male voters is starting to turn a little bit. It's starting to say Black male voters did indeed vote in Georgia. They did indeed vote in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to tell you now, everybody I know, I was depressed on Monday talking about Black male voters and what we need to do to make sure Black male voters are. I had a whole lot of thoughts, and they weren't positive. When you look at the landscape today, in particularly, because we know, and historically we know where Black women voters have been and where they deliver their vote, and certainly sin. Not to say that we take them for granted, but the conversation was, I heard up to 15 to 18% of Black males might be voting for Republican candidates or candidates against Black candidates, Black women, and it just, I couldn't put two and two together. I didn't understand it. What, I guess the question is now today, one, did you hear that narrative? Was this something that you're concerned about? And then two, today, do you feel differently? As I actually do feel a little bit differently. I feel a little bit better. Not a lot, because I still see Killer Mike. I see what's happening. But I feel a little bit better about Black male voters today.
Right. So I'll go ahead and break it down for those watching and let you know that it wasn't Black male voters, it wasn't Black women voters, it was white folks that went ahead and decided not to put Stacey Abrams in the position that she deserves. When we look at the count, when we look at the voters, the number of Black men that did vote for the other guy, even if they for Stacey, she still wouldn't have won.
That's what I saw today. That's what I saw today. Yep. If every Black male voted for Warnock, it still wouldn't have changed, or Stacey, it still wouldn't have changed, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. It comes down to, we know how white men are going to vote, but we have white women who continuously vote against their own interests because of their connection and their adjacency to whiteness and the white male privilege. And so it's kind of hard to legislate somebody's heart or to kind of say, hey, what are you doing? So it kind of also takes us back to what Takeem mentioned earlier of bringing in and registering new voters, because people who vote are going to vote. So we got to bring in some new ones.
And I will say this, Takita, I'll let you take it. But speaking of new voters, voters under 30 seem to turn out pretty heavily all across the country, and they seem to have made their voices heard on a lot of things, not just candidates, but ballot initiatives and court. There's a lot of states, not Virginia, but a lot of states that elect judges. It seemed like candidates under 30 really let their voices be heard. So I'll ask you about young voters, but I also do want to get, as a black male here on this panel, and we're going to bring in Alan very shortly. Did you hear that narrative, and did you believe it? What were you thinking? Because I'm gonna tell you, I was depressed and sounding the alarm at the same time.
Yes, I did hear that narrative. So first about the young voters, and I know this is something that Jewel is doing here in Richmond, but she's trying to enlarge that tent and turn some of those young voters into activists and volunteers, which I think like you're doing great work. So kudos to you on that. Yes, and actually, I think you and I share we exchanged a few messages, cheats about the narrative about Kemp
Probably
having
more than a few.
no problem, right? And so I was relieved once I started seeing that the exit polling data. I have tried to dig into still like some of the differences in Abrams and Warnock, and so the thing that I'm seeing with a number of incumbent governors around the country, governors are pretty popular because of the federal stimulus dollars, irrespective of their party. And I think that's could be one of the reasons why we see Evers and Barnes in Wisconsin running a little bit different as well. So Evers, the incumbent Democratic governor, poised to be reelected, and Barnes is going to come up a little bit short. And so,
what a great race he ran! What a great race!
And so I think that's one of the factors. As Jewel shared that once we start looking at these crosstabs and by race and gender, it's like, wow, like this isn't what I'm seeing in polling before elections, right? And so one of the things that I've always researched and looked into was, some people call it the Bradley effect, some people call it the Wilder effect, but how often candidates of color underperform at the ballot after the polling beforehand. And so the theory is that when people are being polled, they don't want folks to think that they are racist, so they'll say, "Oh, I'm voting." At first it was Bradley, but we saw it with
right. We saw it with Wilder
in '89 here in Virginia.
That's also kind of crazy because you saw a little bit of reversal with that with Obama as well. But go ahead.
Yeah, but that was one of the things that Wilder he was kind of standing on the table, beating the drum in 2008, November 2008, saying, "Hey, don't take anything for granted because we've seen this story before." Because I think Wilder was up 9.5 points in polling right before the weekend before.
So
and then
historically,
I think he by a half point, and everyone else in the ticket, they won much earlier that night, and he was the top of the ticket.
The comedic, and that's not comedic, but the irony about the Wilder election now, especially if you look at it, I don't know. As more and more I travel the state, I'm mind boggled about what happened in '88 and '84. But the interesting thing about Wilder is Marshall Coleman came out very heavy pro-life, and in the '80s, being very heavily pro-life is not the same. It was a overwhelmingly rejection. And by Wilder being the pro-choice candidate, got a lot more votes than he ever would have had if Wilder wasn't the pro-choice. Given what we know now about the final count of that gubernatorial race, if Wilder hadn't been the pro-choice candidate, he would have lost. if it was a wash or if it was the spirit like we look at abortion rights today, it's a different climate. But he won in the late '80s because at that time, Roe versus Wade and all that, they was like, no, we are. Even Virginia was not, a hard line pro life candidate. Let me do this, and I know we're coming up a little bit past the hour, and I'm Joe Jewel. You got a lot to do. I'm gonna bring in another person, a former candidate for city council here in the city of Richmond. My guy Alan Charles Chipman.
What's up, brother?
What is going on, Alan? I did want to get your take. I wanted to ask about, and Joel, I know if you need to drop off, just let me know at any time. But if you want to stay, please stick around. Because we need you. Us brothers, we probably we gonna definitely mess something up.
I want to hear what AP has to say. I'll wait for Alan.
Right, we gonna mess something up if you ain't here to keep us straight. So, Alan, I did want to get your take in regards to your overall mood, and if you had any opinions on what we were talking about just recently about the young vote and what we were seeing about the black male vote, because it was believable too. Don't get it twisted. The 15% of black men that was either voting for Kemp or voting for Rubio or because those things were very believable, and we just got to call it what it is. It was rooted in misogyny and rooted in kind of this notion that certain people have to cater to certain other people. It was a lot of that. So, what was your take, Alan?
Well, first I'll talk about the young voters. I think when the Biden administration really took a stand on canceling some levels of student debt, and most importantly, also changing around the type of interest rates and type of things, and making that kind of even though it's hung up in court. And I think, and I knew this was the reason why they really wanted to block it. It was really so that they wouldn't have to run against candidates that supported this actually happening. But I think even that nudge towards some type of debt cancellation or some of the more progressive things in that, I think really gave young people something to really like feel and like go towards, besides just running against racist and all these other types of things. But I think that lean towards more of the progressive, some would say, Bernie-esque type of policies, I think was a way of giving something to that progressive group who maybe felt that Biden was more centered than they would want to be. And so I think that was a really good benefit, and I hope that people will make some of those soft leans going forward as well. So I think that was important. As far as the black men voting in that kind of percentage, there's this song by Marvin Gaye called "Woman of the World" that I think really explains this dynamic very well. But he has actually had like the vulnerability to like really say what it was about, and it's like it was supposed to be on What's Going On, because which was about his brother Frankie coming home from the Vietnam War. But he also had this song that didn't make the record about a black man who was returning from prison, and just talks about all the different systemic things where he's kind of coming home, and he's looking at where the woman that he loves is kind of further than where he is, and all of these other obstacles. But he's just humbly just being like, all right, we're going to figure out together. Where do you want me? Where do you need me to be? I got you. Right. And I think there's been almost this almost trying to play maybe some of that difference and where people may feel that they are to kind of have this to play into that kind of misogynoir against black women, and trying to like pit that. And there's that narrative that's there, and just people just trying to act like they're revolutionary when they're not, like Killer Mike, I'm gonna go shake Brian Kemp's, and it's like, bro, when King and Whitney Young and Andrew Young went in and was taking pictures, they came out with a plan, they came out with some type of legislation, they were able to organize it, but you just came out with a picture. So like, what is, so like, why are they somehow qualified? You know what I mean? Like, to be that kind of, but I guess if people are just at that point, I guess that's kind of where they are. But for the majority, I mean, we can't forget how much black men like who know their history, like, don't rock with the Republican Party. Like, I remember one time when I was knocking doors. My first slate of signs did not have that I was a Democrat on there. So my first round of literature, I'm knocking. I come up to this brother, older man. He's like, "Oh, hey, young brother, what you doing?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm running." Da 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 da. And he looks at my he's looking at my stuff, and he's like, "Are you a Republican?" I was like, "Nah, man, I'm a Democrat." He was like, "Oh, I was about to tell you to get off my lawn." But it was like, so it's still like very much like we don't play. But I think people are trying to wedge this kind of animosity towards that, and I think there is a realm of that misogyny and some of those other things, rhetorics where black men don't want to be held accountable, right? Who where they just want to believe, whether it be uh, misogyny, whether it be people talk about like the Kevin Samuels followers and all those other things, like I think uh, perhaps there are just some things that they don't want to be held accountable
I
on,
mean,
and so there's this
in
narrative
my
of that.
in
Yeah,
my mind, it shows up the most. And I know we've been talking about Georgia a lot, but it shows up the most when black women are on the ballot. And
yeah.
so, and it, I would love to try to find an excuse for why this happens, but the two glaring examples that you see throughout history is look at the black male vote, which was still very overwhelmingly Democrat with Trump v. Clinton, but it was more black men voting for Trump than they ever had before. When you look at that race, and then you look at the what we were assuming was going to be the numbers of black men that were voting for Kemp over Stacey Abrams. You look at the Val Demings race, and you're sitting there saying you're scratching your head. It's like this is what I told a colleague of mine the other day, which I still believe in some ways to be true, but because one night's not going to change certain things. But it was you could have a qualified woman candidate, and if they had a checklist for black men, and say the checklist is 10 things, if that candidate, the woman candidate, knocked off 8 things out of the 10, and then their opponent, whether it's a white male, if they knocked off 2, you got, again, I hate to use direct examples, but I will in this case. You got a Killer Mike type person of the world saying, hey, look at what this person did. They did 2 things on this list. Meanwhile, the woman
I'm still waiting on
candidate,
the two.
right, the woman
What did
candidate
Brian do?
is saying, I did 8 of your requests. I got 8 or 9 out of 10. And they're talking. And so I just struggle with it. I've always struggled with it because in order for a lot of the candidates that we're talking about, Val Demings, Stacey Abrams, like I said, even going back to Hillary Clinton, they have to be overly qualified. I'm talking about, look at those resumes.
Yeah,
Overly qualified versus the candidate they're running against. And I still haven't been able to come to terms with some of that.
yeah. The thing about Killer Mike is he was just as toxic in 2016 when he was attacking Hillary in favor of Bernie, right? Like, but a lot of people gave him a pass because it was Bernie, but his
Okay.
his comments were inappropriate and like the irony to I remember when he introduced Bernie at one of the big events in 2016, he talked about like Martin King and not just settling for ice cream and like basically saying tokenism, right? And here he is, and 6 years later, doing the exact same thing that he claimed to like have such a disdain for. Um, it's hypocrisy. It's backwards. Um, Unfortunately, this is where we are, and I think
Or is it free thinking, Takeen? Is it liberation? Is
There's a difference between
forgive me. These are layups.
thinking and critical
I
thinking.
mean, I'm looking for like opportunities to change this, right?
Right.
I think the Val Demings raise, the Sherry Beasley raise, um, you know, there are things that I think we definitely should learn from it. I'll be the first to tell you, we definitely don't have it all figured out in Virginia, and we have a long way to go. But the Democratic Party of Florida, um, they're much further behind us,
Can
and I think
this? Can I ask Jewel? I want to ask Jewel a question. Jewel, oh, you're on mute. Where is that? Can you hear me, Jewel? Can you answer or no? Okay, I don't hear. I can't hear. I'm
she
trying
said
to
she's muted.
Okay, did I mute her? Or is it, I'm trying to figure out, and anybody can jump in, but can we nationally? Can we just wipe Florida? Can Democrats just kind of divert Florida, like divert resources away? Like, can they take the 50 state strategy and make it 49 and just be like, y'all have Florida?
I mean, I do think that we are investing way too much money in Florida and resources like time, energy, people, as well as money. But I don't think we should ever just like concede any place. Like
I'm ready to concede.
I think
I
we
mean, if the
need to
Andrew
like,
Gillum
build
situation
the
went a little bit
infrastructure
different, we
in
might be
Florida.
having a different conversation too.
Yeah, I think we need to build the infrastructure in Florida, and I think that like if we had given some of those resources that we invested in Florida this year to Sherry Beasley in North Carolina, like we may be in a different place. We may be having a different conversation.
Or Tim Ryan in Ohio, right? Is that the conversation?
Or maybe Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin.
No. So, and go ahead, Alan. Go ahead.
I
Look,
wouldn't be
I
too,
hear
I
you,
wouldn't
Alan.
be too quick to wipe Florida off the board. I think
I would.
you're seeing. I know.
I'm
But I
through
think
with
the
Florida. I'm
absence
through with
and
it.
the I guess the personal turmoil Andrew Gillum was going through, but like he had a dedicated plan to really build a lot of that. Like similar, it Florida right now is, even though the result was Warnock and Ossoff in Georgia, but Gillum was kind of running some of that kind of parallel strategy of building those types of things in there. But then once he got into his trouble, and now with I don't know what the new scandal is, but like I think the absence of that figure and that national energy, kind of like how a Beto was like trying to slowly over a long process work over Texas. But I think the absence of that is there, and I just don't know if they have the figure or the person that can really like figure that out. And
I don't know, bro. I say that only because as I guess as notable as a candidate as Gillum was, and how close as he came to winning at the time that he ran pre-scandal, right? Val Demings is an extremely qualified candidate. Now, there's some police history there, right?
listen,
There's things that would turn
my brother lives in
people
Tampa.
off.
No,
But my thing with Florida is that I think it's a moving in the wrong direction type situation, and they have to show. I would think a lot of states have to show real progress of moving in the right direction, or else I would say like devoid of certain resources.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I get. I know, like the party can't say that, but I would be like, put that money in Colorado, put that money in Arizona, put that money in Nevada.
well,
Florida
so this is
just
the
kills me.
thing. I think for the past 22 years at this juncture, right? Like we've invested a lot of money in Florida. But unfortunately, I think Florida's infrastructure, like democratic infrastructure, is going the wrong way. And so like we're continuously putting money in Florida and saying, "Oh, like we can be competitive, like there's an opportunity," but like you can't start this work, as Jewel talked about earlier with candidates, like they can't show up in October. We can't start this work in August or September and then think that like we're doing the work necessary to flip a state like Florida. Like
Right.
it's going
But
to
I
it's
don't
going
think
to take
that's. I
time.
don't think that's the case. I think we've been.
I mean,
sucking up to Florida.
but so maybe I'm the eternal optimist, but
Right.
I think we should continue to do some of the work, but we should say, okay, like these are our goals. These are how many people we're going to register to vote. These are the cities that we're going to try to get a majority on council. Like I think we have to rebuild that party from the ground up in Florida, because I don't know how much y'all follow like some of the Democratic politics, but Florida's like ground zero.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're just very united on the crazy right now. Like I think the only, and this is strange. This is me just spitballing, but as Coop has already said, we don't really do the predictions anymore. But I'd be very interested to see what the dynamics between kind of the split that's going on in the Republican Party, which I think is kind of the reason why that red wave or that red drip didn't really even happen. I'll be very interested to see. And I think President Biden said this today in his press conference. Like, it'd be very interesting to see Trump and DeSantis kind of go after each other, and it'll be very interesting to see, with a cult-like following that Trump has, if he starts beefing with DeSantis, or what do you call him, Ron DeSanctimonious or something.
It's already started.
But it'd be interesting, like after that split, like if there's a primary between DeSantis and Trump for president in 2024, like.
I think it's already started.
There's enough spite that, some people might, you know what I mean? If there be like a weakness that where it might be interesting to see what it is to run ground game with more of a split Republican Party, just like in the same way how there was very much a very moderate and progressive split in the Democratic Party, and there have been like some wedges that have happened there. But I just would be interested to see.
I will tell you this: I think it's already started, and I think the question is if either one of them blinks. Right, there's a strategically, given what we saw yesterday, and like you said, there's an interesting dynamic, because if there was indeed a red wave and they won the House by 30, 40, 45 seats, and they took over the Senate by a couple of key Senate seats, and maybe they flipped, they ran the entire straight and flipped everything. Well, then you would see, I think, an emboldened Trump that says, see, look at what I did. My candidates are, we're doing good, and we're waving all across. And you would also see, obviously, what we're seeing with DeSantis in Florida. What's happened now is, I think, extremely interesting, because nationally it's much closer. And what that means is, Ron DeSantis just won re-election. He's got at least 4 more years. And so he would have to decide if he's running for president almost now, right? Or what he could do is say, hey, look, this what happened yesterday proves that the Democrats and President Biden, are going to be a lot more motivated than we thought. They're going to have a lot more confidence than we thought. You know what I mean? It's not this, just punch on President Biden like a punching bag. So there's an idea that somebody like Ron DeSantis says, hey, let's wait till Biden gets out and run and eyes what would be, a possible race against Vice President Harris or another candidate, and says, hey, Trump, you have it, with nobody thinking that, Trump probably wins if he runs again. There's a whole lot of interesting inside baseball.
So this is the thing, like 6 years is a mighty long time to wait.
Tell Chris Christie, right? Chris Christie was in the same place.
Superstar, right? I mean, we think about in 2000 or even 2002, no one thought that, like, who was Barack Obama, right? At that point.
Right. Absolutely.
And then, the whole world changes, and he gives that speech in 2004 and gets elected to the Senate in 2006. And so I don't know if DeSantis is willing to wait that long.
Study long, study wrong half the time. You mentioned Obama, like you said, Chris Christie, Mario Cuomo. These are all people that could have been possibly president of the United States if they didn't wait there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Wait for the right opportunity, right?
Yeah. And so it's interesting, right, that this rift that they have. And it's also interesting that, like, I feel like in some ways media, they're trying to prop up DeSantis now. And like, let's call it what it is. He was expected to win yesterday, right? Like,
yeah, by a lot. Okay, Charlie.
That wasn't a surprise.
No.
I mean, the thing that I'm hopeful for, I'll say this. I mean, I hope Donald Trump announces next week. Like that's the best case scenario for us with this runoff. Like let Donald Trump run and we make the next month about Donald J. Trump, right? Like in Georgia. Everything about Donald Trump. Because as much as people think about Trump, like Trump never had a plurality, right? Like in 2016, I think he only got 33% in the primary. It was just 17 people.
Sure.
And so, you know, in Georgia, I think this is something that also helped Kemp, like, hey, I stood up to Trump. I beat
Right.
this guy,
Right.
and Trump lost the election there in 2020. So, hey, by all means, Herschel Walker invite Trump. You know, Trump, have your big announcement next week. Throw all the rocks that you can at DeSantis. Like, let them fight all they want. We're gonna run our race.
Alan, let me ask this before we get chatted. We're coming up on 8:30. This is the Chiefs Movement Podcast. I've got Takeen Cooper with me. I've got Alan Charles Shipman. I want to thank Jordan for being on as well. Alan, what should we be looking forward to? What should we be looking? I said forward, but what I mean, what should we be aware of, looking out for, looking forward to as we go through the next couple of really days? Obviously, we got to figure out what the actual Senate and House look like. But what should we be aware of as we go through the next Congress and leading into the next major national election, which would be 2 years in the presidential election?
Yeah, I mean, I think they need to get back to some of the. I think they need to come back to like the child, the child tax credit, or like some of the or some of the things that were part of the Build Back Better. I think would be helpful. You know, one of my concerns why I wasn't. I'm pleasantly surprised, but why I wasn't feeling as good about yesterday was I felt that the Democrats are trying to have these very big like conversational like democracies on the ballot, all these other types of things, which is true, you know, and you know, talking about early stages of fascism and all that stuff, which is important and true and is happening. But people are really concerned around like, you know, I was talking to an older gentleman in Kroger in Lombardi, and he was like, young man, what did your mother used to make you when you were a child? I'm like, oh man, you know, cream of wheat. He's like, how much was it? It couldn't have been more than 179. He's like, young man, why is this cream of wheat $4.39? The apple cinnamon Cheerios is $6.30. And I was just thinking, like, what is the messaging and how does this really hit home for people like Mr. Hubert? That was his name. But I think there's like, I don't want to see us make the same mistake that we made in Virginia, where we're going for like, it's Donald Trump, it's democracy, it's all these other types of things, where, you know, it's hard to have those dinner table conversations when it's hard to put dinner on the table. But there were a lot of good things that Democrats have done, or at least attempted to do, that I think they should really drive home to. Hey, well, if you care about inflation and people are kind of running on these things, like let's talk about, you know, some of the issues that Katie Porter has been talking about around the price gouging. That's really the cause for why these things are kind of going up. Going back to the child tax credit, going back to, you know, really how can we help families not just have a conceptual connection to what the Democratic Party is doing and this abstract, you know, justice and things like that, but like people aren't eating, you know, people aren't bringing justice and putting on the table and, you know, eating that. You know, I think there's a ways to do both. And by really focusing on giving people some victories where they're able to say, you know, like people say, there's a reason why Donald Trump put his name on the stimulus checks, right? There's some political strategy to that. I think there's some things in Build Back Better. I think there's some things in some of these initiatives. You know, if we can do some things with the housing market and a lot of these things that are making what people call the American dream less and less accessible, and some, you know, focusing on some of those issues, which I think could also be a great meeting place for some of those leaning towards some of the more progressive issues. You know, I think that would affect turnout in the future. But you know, that's what I would focus on if I was Biden. I think it's time to really stop letting the Mancins and the cinemas of the world really start, you know, clowning people's own agenda. And I think if we can get that going, I think there's a good case for when these next round of elections come up, in my opinion.
Yeah, here's the thing. Whatever happens, I think it's going to be tougher, right? So what I'm hearing is that basically the Biden administration and Congress and those guys, they need to execute and deliver on, they need to actually do things. Like, and to their credit, I would say going into this midterm election, as compared to Keen, we were going into last year's races in Virginia, leading up to last year's gubernatorial statewide races in Virginia, Congress failed to enact just about anything. I mean, nothing. I think there is a number of points going into the midterm elections that the Biden administration ultimately could say, hey, look, we passed this, we could take things home, you know what I mean, and show people. Now, and again, Alan, I think these are big picture things. These aren't things that you're talking about are going to affect the price of cream of wheat. And I think that's the easiest target, right, for any opponent, for any incumbency, is, hey, look at inflation, look at the cost of living, look at the, you know what I mean, like look at these types of things.
That's where Whitman ran commercials on, even though his party was voting against everything.
Absolutely, and it was very smart. It was a very smart tactic, because here's the realities, I think, of what we're looking at is, even if the price of gas comes down, it's not going to come down to the price of gas when I was in high school, right?
Sure.
So we're even if the price of some consumer goods goes down, it's not, you know what I mean. The price of a living wage goes up. It's still going to be lower, you know what I mean, than the change. So I think we have to educate folks. I think there's an education element to what in 2022 and moving forward, what some of this stuff looks like. Because even if there were no supply chain issues, even if there wasn't a war in Ukraine, even if there, like, some of these prices are still going to go up.
And it's the price gouging. Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into it. And I think my point is, I think you got to deliver on, I think you work as hard as you can to deliver on some of the bigger. I mean, student loan debt, I think it's huge. I think housing, as you mentioned, doing things with housing and evictions across the nation, I think are huge. I think it gets harder. I think it gets harder in January, no matter what the landscape looks like, because it's going to more than it does. I was told, or I read today, it doesn't matter if the House flips by 100 votes or one, because it will be ran like they have the majority that they'll have.
All the crazy about to pull up on McCarthy. My main concern with the Biden administration, and I love the infrastructure bill. I'm organizing around that, and we're getting some connections for that and some of the organizing we're doing. But I don't want to be in a case where the majority of Biden's agenda are things that we're going to feel in 6 to 8 years versus that we're going to
feel because it's going to be that does affect electoral politics. Like I said, I think the problem is after come January, I just don't see a lot getting done no matter which way you do, because you're back to having to get something to the House, having to get something to the Senate, having the president sign it. I mean, it's legislative. It's not going to be an easy thing. You got to take advantage of what you can now. And that's, I think, the crux of frustration when you look at, like you had mentioned, two senators in particular that seem to often hold up things longer than they should. But I think those are the challenges, right? Because you have that window. Like I said, I think the administration did a really good job in delivering some of these things, especially as we came into this year. I really do. And I think that's a challenge. Takeen, I'm going to give you the last word because we're going to get out of here.
I think kind of you talk about that strategy. If you look, the past 6-8 months or so, the administration, they've kind of changed their priorities, right? So instead of making it like this one big pie in the sky, the largest bill ever, they've started like piecemealing it and saying, hey, we're going to accomplish something. And so I think that was an effective strategy leading up to the midterm, because then the president could go around. Not to mention, if you look at the places that he actually visited, like those were really positive for us, right? So like the president went to Pennsylvania, Fetterman won. He didn't go to Wisconsin, even though he won Wisconsin, and Barnes lost, right? And so, but he had that narrative over the past 6, 8 months, like, hey, look, we're beginning to accomplish these things. And so today he was saying, hey, the American people will begin to see the fruits of that labor in Q1. So I think that's kind of a lofty expectation, but we will see. Yeah, I mean,
he was talking spicy, man. It was a Delaware Dawn out there. Pinstripe Joe was out there.
Gentlemen, last final word on this and last question. And I know you guys don't do predictions, but when it's all said and done, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, what does the Senate look like?
We're going to have 52.
I hope we can get Arizona and Georgia. That's what my hope is.
I think we're going to get Nevada as well. When I saw an article today that said that all of the we're going to get 51, 52. But the article I saw earlier today said that all of the day of voting, all those ballots have been counted.
Mm.
And I think the early vote, the vote by mail, I think those are going to be positive for the senator. So I think we definitely have a shot in Nevada, Arizona, and Alan, y'all try to make this trip down to Georgia?
Man, listen, I was like, I might go down and have to start knocking, man. But that's the thing, because that 2%, I don't remember even the name of the candidate, but I was like, that's them libertarians, man.
In Georgia, they got 2%.
Where they gonna recast, but I'm not sure if it's all gonna be with Warnock, because I don't know, man.
Here's the thing. I think the question about Georgia is a matter of turnout at that point. Anytime you go to a runoff type thing, and
what we need to talk about is the history of runoffs and like why they exist, because it's racist, right? It's kind of like the Dillon rule in Virginia, which I've softened on the Dillon rule now. That's another.
You're softening out. You're softening now.
Well, look, I used to be bullish about we need to get rid of the Dillon rule, but after the sanctuary city nonsense a few years back, and I don't know if y'all have been seeing, they're kind of trying to create these those sanctuary cities were around gun rights, right? Second Amendment. Now they're trying to do the same thing around abortions, where local legislative bodies are like banning abortions in municipalities. And it's like, y'all don't have the authority to do that. But because of some of that behavior, I'm like, maybe we should keep the Dillon rule. But the history of runoffs is really, really interesting. Maybe we have a group chat about it at some point.
We'll have to do it another time. Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you for joining the Cheats Movement. Thanks for talking about these midterm elections. Virginia, just a recap. If you're looking at Virginia now, the makeup, what exactly are we looking at on the makeup? The first, Whitman. The second will be, how do you say it? Keegan's. The third will be Bobby Scott. The fourth will be Donald McEachin. The fifth, Bob Good returns. The sixth is, who is the sixth?
Ben Klein.
Ben Klein returned in a big way. The seventh is Abigail Spanberger. Then we've got in the ninth, it's Morgan Griffith, but then you've got Wexon Connolly and Beyer as well. So it's the congressional makeup of Virginia's congressional is really interesting. Obviously, you have 2 Democratic senators, but you have a Republican governor. So Virginia is all over the place, and it's something that I think we'll be keeping an eye on, and we'll be talking about and discussing different topics. We don't do this often on the Cheats Movement anymore. We used to do it. We used to do it a lot. We used to do the city a lot, but I thought it was an interesting opportunity to come on and talk about these midterms as they're still, like I said, still counting votes, still hangs in the balance. But I think the overall consensus is, this country is not as far to one side, one way or the other, as we might have thought going into this going into Tuesday. So, gentlemen, I thank you. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, we see it.